Welcome to the Culture of Writing podcast, where writers, editors, and content strategists from Salesforce talk about how we work together to improve our craft and make content better.
Kate did some experimentation with AI on legacy content and is kind enough to share what she found out.
Hi, Stan. Thanks so much for having me today. So I am a lead technical writer on Revenue Cloud, and I had a scenario that I suspect is common to many writers, in which I was asked to resolve a doc bug for a legacy feature that I am not very familiar with. The writer who originally wrote the content is several years old. The writer who originally wrote the content has left Salesforce a long time ago. The people who originally worked on it are not involved with the product, are not involved with that area anymore. But it is a doc bug that has a number of cases resolved, a number of cases associated with it. So it is a priority to address it in some way.
Quick question, Kate, and I'm sorry to interrupt you. So you took legacy. There's a legacy piece of content that was written by somebody that's no longer here, so you can't go to the original writer, and it's prioritized because we're getting like customer service cases and we're getting complaints about it, or describe that just a little bit, and then do go on. Thank you.
Sure. Yes. So it's the feature is several years old. The writer who originally wrote the content isn't at the company anymore, so I don't have anyone I can go to and ask, like, do you remember anything about how this thing works? And the doc bug is essentially a request to explain how the feature works in a more technical way than what appears to exist in the current documentation set. So the current doc set is fairly dense. So I wondered, is the answer there? And I just need to spend 3 hours reading through everything to really piece it together. Does the answer already exist out there, but it's not surfacing in a way that is meeting customers' expectations or needs. There's also several trailhead modules out there about the feature. And again, the answer could be in those trailhead modules, but without spending the time to go through each one, I don't know. So my goals for the experiment, so this is a scenario. We have a doc bug that basically says, hey, we don't have doc that clearly explains what happens when a record is approved or rejected or recalled. Please write a new doc explaining this. So I'm like wondering, does the content exist already and we just need to find it and surface it? Do I need to do a deep dive and create brand new content? And there's not a lot of support from product management or engineering because, again, they've moved on to other things at this point and the original folks are not available. So my goals were twofold. One was really put myself in the customer's shoes. I think a lot of folks are looking at Gen AI and asking questions. They're almost using it as you would say a search engine, a Google search, right? You ask a question, you hope you get a good answer back. So I asked the questions that I thought customer would ask. How does this one work? If a record is approved, what happens next? The other thing I wanted to find out, and I wanted to see how the system was going to answer those questions, because I was curious if a customer does do this, because I would assume they would, are they going to get information that's useful for them? Is the information accurate? The other question is, does the answer exist already? And if so, could I use that? Is it sufficient enough that I can use it to create a new help topic or refactor an existing help topic? I'll quickly get to some of my takeaways, and then I'll go through some of the prompts that I gave. One is that the answers, the pros, and this is the pro and con, the answers that I got back sounded great. They're written coherently. They make sense for how I'd assume this feature works. And it's a good starting point for organizing a topic. The flip side of that is this accurate? I have no idea if the information that it gave me is accurate. And so a customer can certainly read this and say, this totally makes sense. This must be how the thing works. Is that true? Right? So it's two sides of the same coin. Another pro gave me ideas for a rough draft for a new help topic. It helped me, think about how I would organize it. And again, the con is really the accuracy. It's the sources of information. One thing that's interesting is I asked the system for sources. And some of the sources it told me it was using are not for the correct feature. Right? So this is for a process for approvals process.
Okay.
So you expect that Salesforce, there are many ways to do sometimes the same thing or similar things. So at Salesforce, you have approval processes and you have now advanced approval processes. And advanced approval processes are for more complex use cases than just plain old approval processes. I thought that was very interesting. So here's some of the prompts. And then my takeaways, my tips for writers are really, it's helpful for organizing, creating rough drafts. It's interesting to ask for sources. That's sort of a way to help verify your information that you're getting back. And again, of course, confirm the accuracy of the content against authoritative sources. But here's some of the prompts that I gave. And I said, well, my first prompt is like, what happens when an approval request in Salesforce Advanced Approvals is approved? And I wrote this in such a way because I wanted it to really focus on, Salesforce Advanced Approvals, as opposed to other companies' approval, specifically the features called Advanced Approvals, which, as mentioned, different than the I should say plain vanilla approvals. And so it gave me these answers. I used GPT-4 for OpenAI. And it gave me some answers. This is kind of nice. It gave me a list of like, okay, these events are triggered, right? That makes sense. The record, the status changes. It sends a notification. When this happens, it can trigger the next step in a predefined process, right? It locks the record. It unlocks the records. It updates certain fields. Technically, field updates is the same as this, right? But I appreciate that it tells me this. And then I asked, I asked the same question, but I said, what's your source? And it came back and it said, my source for this information is the Salesforce help doc, especially these sections on approval processes and advanced approvals. And I pointed out that, my caveat for this is that this is actually a different feature than the one that I had asked about. So I continued asking a series of questions. What happens if it's approved? What happens if it's rejected? What's interesting is when I ask different questions, I sort of ask the same question, but I'd ask it again, I'd get a slightly different answer. So like this is interesting. It's roughly the same question, but then it adds a summary. Which is actually helpful because you could use the summary to write a short description in your doc. I then said, well, what's the difference between these two statements that you gave me? And I just copied and pasted in the statements. And I like that it tells me it essentially conveys the same meaning, but it uses different words and different sentence structure, which is true. And I went through various other questions. There's another thing that I found kind of amusing. I asked, what happens when a request is rejected? And it explains like what happens. It goes to the next step. You get a notification. And again, that sounds right to me. And this time it gave me the source, although I didn't ask the source. But I do appreciate it. It tells me it's from the official help doc. That warms my tech writer soul. It also tells me that the documentation provides a comprehensive overview of the process, including what happens when the request is rejected. I was a bit amused by this because I then looked up the doc itself and it does not describe this information. So I also used it a little bit to talk about shortening descriptions and tried to play around with it to see if I could get some of the answers. But anyway, that's roughly where I got. In terms of, again, the takeaways for other writers, again, it sounds good. It's a good way to get a starting point for organizing the topic. Again, the question I come back to again is accuracy and how do you know that this is the right information?
Yeah, that's so interesting, Kate. I could put you on the spot, and there's not an easy answer to this. Is on the accuracy question. what would do you have any recommendations? And if you don't, that's fine. But do you have any recommendations of what you could, on how you could approach that accuracy question as a certain queries with PMs or whatever? I don't know.
I think there's a couple different things you can do. One is if you add a delimiter in your prompt, if you say, only look at this information, then my hope is that the system then is only looking at a subset of information and pulling from that versus, say, the whole wide world of everything on the internet. Again, the more specific the prompt, it seems the more likely that you would get a more accurate answer, right? If you narrow that universe of what you're asking. And also, I was really curious about how it gave me sources. Again, I don't have a way of testing that that is the correct source that it pulled that information from, but it was interesting to me that it seemed to know that that source existed. When it said, I read this doc, I'm pulling from this doc, it was giving me the correct titles of the docs.
Yeah, that's new to me as well. That's really interesting. But I think those are great caveats. And your point, it's been made by others too, is the accuracy is a big question. So thank you so much. Appreciate this very much.
You're welcome. And it also, maybe looking at GPT for accuracy is not really the right use case. We're asking and expecting something from a tool that it's not able to do, maybe using it as a way to shorten content or revise content. Maybe that's a better use case for this particular tool.
Yeah, totally fair point. So this is great. I mean, it's the Wild West, right? We're all learning. So this is great. We're all learning.
We're learning.
That's for sure.
So mine's a little bit different in terms of what I wanted to share today. So I used Einstein GPT to try to create first draft release notes. So I started with some PRDs, and I pulled out what I thought could be useful from those PRDs, and I have them linked in this doc that I can share. And let me make this bigger. I should have put it in a nice Google Doc like Kate, but so here's some text directly from the PRD, and then here's the prompt that I reused, and then here's the output. And you can see that I did this several times, and I started trying, figuring out my prompts. Like, it was interesting. When I told it to shorten, it didn't actually shorten it. It still made it longer. And I tried shorten and simplify.
Quick question, well, just to be clear, when you're showing what you're entering, you're literally entering that text into the engine, into the Einstein engine, right? And
Yeah.
then asking, okay. Thanks.
Yep. So I'm writing at the top, shorten and simplify the following : and then I literally just paste this whole thing in there. And then what comes out is in this third column here. I think maybe I could even do it a little bit bigger. Yeah. So you can see like it was okay. It like wasn't great. It really was just reorganizing what I said, and it didn't always shorten it. Sometimes it still made it longer, like significantly longer. Like look at this, it turned a couple sentences into 3 paragraphs, and it makes it really marketing-y too. Like I said, summarize and make content shorter, and then it gave me 3 paragraphs, and it said like, with this powerful tool at their disposal, blah blah blah. So that's why I started changing my prompts and asking to shorten and simplify. And then I thought, well, maybe I should use some different parts from the PRD. So I pulled the goal and the top pain points for the users. I'm going to literally just copied and pasted from the PRD and like massage it at all, and then put that through to see what I get. And then I felt like it was starting to get a little more interesting. So let me zoom out now. And then I realized you could get multiple outputs in one. So I started doing as many as I could. And I started also playing with some of the different settings to give it some more flexibility. Again, I won't read all of these, but it's kind of the same thing where like it was still making it really long and it was adding like just a bunch of, kind of like salesy type of language to it. I felt like when I highlighted this was like the best one I got, because it gave me a title, which I thought was really nice. And it kind of introduced it really well, like in today's competitive business landscape, blah, blah, blah. And then it went on to kind of talk about things in a normal kind of release note type of way. So this was probably the best one. And then I tried another PRD for another feature.
For the best one, kind of, how did you hone that? Like, what steps did you take, or was like just one of the selections that you?
It just happened. It was random, because I've been telling it to shorten the following for a long time. But this time it gave me a title, which I liked. And like I said, it started with here's the issue, and then it led into what the feature is. Whereas a lot of the other ones was really just reorganizing exactly what I gave it, like within the same paragraph. So it was just basically moving sentences around or changing words, So instead of saying another way, it would say like an alternative way, like, so it wasn't that useful, because as writers, we know synonyms as well. So I tried another one. And again, I was getting like, look, so I was giving it this and telling it to simplify, and it gave me all of that. So it wasn't really simplifying. Because these are actual PRDs and release notes, I didn't use ChatGPT, but a part of me feels like if I had used regular ChatGPT, I would have gotten better results, because I feel like the prompts are better. Because in ChatGPT, I can be very specific and say, give me this many characters or this many words or this many paragraphs, and it will do that. Here I tried doing that, and it didn't listen, and it definitely wasn't simplifying or shortening. So this is one of the prompts that's in GPT, which is to make it more professional. So I was using exactly what the prompts said. And, I was like, you can see I was playing around with a bunch of the different settings. And let's see. Again, like it wasn't really great. I felt like it was just doing a lot of the same things. Even with the different versions I was getting, like sometimes I will get titles, and like this was an interesting one. It started saying, we will develop a new out of the box. And then it itemized into all of the things it would do. But sometimes it would give me titles and make it really long like this. And then sometimes it would do something else. But I kind of felt like it never really got to the point where it was like, okay, this is a good first draft. I actually felt that it would be a better tool for the third draft. Like once you have something written and you know that it's technically accurate and that it explains the feature the way that you want it to and the way product needs you to, then to give it that like zing and that like, oh boy type of feel, because it was so like laden with, like for instance, every time it said AI, it would add something in front of it like innovative AI or cutting edge AI. It wouldn't let me just say I by itself. It always added like some sort of buzzword to the beginning. So that's why I'm thinking a good tool for, that third or fourth draft when it's like, okay, I have what I want in the order that I want, that covers everything, and now I need to like make it more ziggy.
So it would be the way you're describing it without putting words in your mouth, is that it would be kind of a polishing, a good, as it exists right now, a good polishing tool, right?
Yeah. Like you can see, I really tried. I went through a lot of iterations. Each one of these will open up more. It was really just reorganizing. I felt like it was reformatting things and doing really basic, simple, like, synonym swap outs. But there were, a few gemstones where like it would give me a title and then it would actually give me something readable. But often it would just try to list things.
One question for you too, just relating to the podcast, that you and Lyman and Joe did, which was so great. Did you find it helpful in adding the context, the why, to the release notes or not?
Oh, yes, absolutely. That's the whole reason that you write a release note, right? Is to tell someone why they're going to use something. They don't actually really care about how it works. I mean, they do. Okay, they do care, but the excitement isn't around the details. It's like, what are you going to do for me? What am I going to get out of this? I enjoy eating, less chopping up vegetables, but one has to get me to the other. I have like a cutting board and it's like the tools I need, but when I buy those tools or upgrade those tools, it's not like so I can chop better. It's so I can get to my eating better and make that process more efficient. So, but yeah, so putting the why in release notes is really important. And these PRDs were really well written. That's why I chose them for this exercise, because they were organized really well in terms of what's the use case, who's the users, what are the pain points, and what's the value. And I was hoping that GPT would be able to take all of that and tell me that story that we like to tell with our release notes. Like we're talking to someone, like tell me you're a writer without telling me you're a writer, like we're talking to the salesperson without telling them that they're the salesperson. We're just talking in their language. I was hoping that it would be able to pick up on those kind of more implicit, indirect things, but it wasn't. It was more just like we're going to jump like a scramble and synonym change. Yeah, Emily.
Yeah, I'm curious if you gave a more specific prompt, for example, saying, write this where there's a, why, who section, like sort of outline the sections of our release notes and ask it to organize it that way. And say like, provide a title that includes the business value or something like that, and see if it could then, use that format. Because I ran into the same thing where if you don't tell it exactly what kind of output you want, that it just sort of rehashes what you've given it in more words.
I mean, I was really shooting for just that like short desk, to not even really getting into the how. But it was like numbering things in steps, like I was asking for help. But I didn't do that. I guess I just felt like disheartened because when I was specific to it, like shorten the following to less than 500 words, it was like, look at this, and like just this is so long, I don't. And then I said 100 words. And it's still like, it just wasn't listening at all. So yeah. So I didn't try that specifically, but based on the results, I didn't feel like it was listening to me anyway. So, we weren't on good terms. So this is not less than 50 words.
I do think ChatGPT is more reliable on that. Like if you give it word counts,
yes, it really is. Yeah.
All right. Well, this is awesome, Stephanie. Thank you so much. And we definitely need to schedule a follow-up because I think that'll be really interesting when you can put it in and compare.
Thanks for letting me show and also be able to follow up because I also sent this to the writer that actually works on these features to get their take. So I'll ask Nathan what his take is on like how good these are, because when I looked at them, like I didn't think they were great, but I'll see if he has a different take. and report back to that as well.
So many problems to solve. Little time.
Well, I mean, we're just at the very beginning. It's we tend to beat ourselves up a little bit, but we're all kind of learning. I mean, and having you three and share what your experiences are is just you're going to help so many writers. I think that's it's really going to help them understand what's kind of working now, what's not, what needs to be improved, and also informing kind of use cases of things we can do to really help writers.
Yeah, I feel like there's a ton of things it can do. I mean, like another thing, it's really good at looking at an image and figuring out what's there and describing it. But then at the same time, it's like, how long does alt text really take us? I don't spend more than a minute on it anyway, so that probably wouldn't be worth the time. But there definitely is, I feel like, a ton of opportunities. But in this testing that I was going through, and this was my feeling before I went into the testing, but I feel like my findings backed it up, was it's not good for generating new things.
Mm-hmm.
It really truly is mimicking something that already exists. I was thinking about this, like based on what the model was trained on, like when it kept trying to say cutting edge AI, innovative AI, that's we don't want to fall into that trap of only listening to it in terms of how we should talk about things, because especially for release notes, it is truly new content with because it's new features, things that haven't existed before. That's why it's a release note, right? So if we're putting it through a model and we're expecting it to be able to generate the proper way to talk about something now, it's trained on and trying to mimic things from 5 years ago. And the way that we were talking about AI 5 years ago is truly not the way I want to be talking about AI today, especially when I'm talking about new features and functionality within AI. So it could also, it could ultimately make our release notes worse if we, it's like listening to your grandparents talk about phones or something. It's just like the whole thing just feels wrong, right? So we don't want to end up in that trap where we're like, okay, here's the information in a form, and it'll give me something, and it sounds good, and it sounds exciting, and it's, it's grammatically correct, and submit. But then when people read it, I'm like, what is this? It's the same way we feel when our grandparents talk about phones. So,
But I think that
the internet.
You're thinking about you're looking at like what works for one release note is not what works for when you've got 500 release notes, right? Because everybody wants to say this is the new and improved version of whatever it is, and it's totally cutting edge. But then so are the other 500 things that are being released, right? Because if they weren't new and improved, they wouldn't be being released.
I think one of the important things that you touched on too was like the amount of time that it takes to do the thing. So like, would we use it for alt text, or is it easier to just do alt text ourselves, right? And so I think that all of these examples that both of you gave and the tests that I did, one of the things that I mentioned to Stan was, we need to know really clearly, like, what are the best ways to frame the prompts and what are the best inputs in order to like streamline that process. Because if you are going in and having to do like 4 or 5 or 6 prompts in order to get the output that you want, then you end up spending an hour like manipulating the tool in order to get what you need, and you could have potentially solved the problem with your own brain by then. So I think that's the thing too, is like not just identifying the use cases, but identifying the best ways to get what you need, and then making sure that writers have access to those kind of like high level bullet points, so that when we do try to use them, we're not like spinning our wheels.
What are some other ways that it could help writers? Like to the extent maybe not today, but that would be useful down the road?
Anything having to do with content uplift or refactoring help sets, I think, could be really huge. And I also liked in Kate's example that you used the description from a bug item, because I think that would be interesting as well, to potentially look at. Maybe you have like 3 or 4 tickets with customer feedback, and you could input like however many articles and say like, this is the feedback that we have, like adjust the following content to address these pain points, and see if it gives you an output that you could then massage into topics that address, sort of a more general feedback that you've gotten.
Yeah, I was also thinking, like our dev docs. I've been getting like a bunch of API bugs or like dev doc bugs, and there's a very specific format of things that are needed. And I feel like our dev docs could, especially the ones that document like a lot of our APIs or like our objects, like those could be written by a Gen AI tool because it is so specific and confined and exactly what has to be where. And one of the things I can't do is I like to provide examples as you know, Stephen. So for the developers, they really like examples of, they like code snippets and they like to see what it's actually going to look like. I can't provide that because I'm not a developer. And I can't make it up. I certainly can't make it up. And when I get one from a team, there's no way for me to know if it actually works. And I certainly don't want to document something that's like not good practice or that doesn't follow the rules. But I don't know the nuances of what good syntax is in each language. But a Gen AI tool could learn those things. And then it could produce a code snippet for me, or I could give it one and it could tell me what's wrong with it and how to fix it. Another thing is like those really cool image generation tools, like not the creepy ones on social media, but like it's in one of our trails we actually use it that talks about AI. But coming up with like images to tell like our trailhead stories, I feel like would be something that would be really cool. Like, show me Salesforce Einstein on a rocket with a calculator or something, and it could give us something within the bounds of, the rules and styles that Salesforce likes. Because I know our image team is always overworked and over demanded, and this would be a way to kind of help with that, I think.
I think especially like what you're saying with the API reference content or the object reference content, which is very formulaic, and the piece that's not formulaic are the code snippets. But having a tool that can say, well, the syntax for this is correct, like it looks correct, would be a big help because, like Stephanie mentioned, like I know some languages, but not all of them. So I don't know, is it missing something? Is it not? And it's the kind of thing that a developer could, or someone who is an expert in that language could look at it in 5 seconds and tell me, yeah, this is right, or no, you're missing a colon or a bracket or something.
Yeah, or it's just not in the preferred like professional format. Like,
right.
Yeah, I know a couple languages, but my code is not like good practice. It's heavy. I add a lot of extra stuff that I don't need, and like one long line. But if I'm a good developer, they know how to make it as concise as possible and format it in a way that it's easy for other developers to read. So when they look at, like, they're able to see right away, like, oh, that's, an amateur did that. Like, yes, it works, but that's not the way that as professional developers, we actually would code that. We would break it up here. You don't need to do that. The for loop should be here, not there. Like you might get the same outcome, but it's that, that feeling that they get where it's like, I don't know who did this. This must not have been a good developer. But because I know that, it's like, I don't want to document it. So, it's like, what do you do?
This is just, like I said, there's a lot of, and Stephanie, you both know this, there's a lot of apprehension about it. And I think this is kind of, when you use it, you realize, like Stephanie, it's not push button, get finished, 400-page doc set. We all realize that now. And so I think hearing you all tell these stories is going to be incredible. So thank you so much.
Thanks for putting together, Stan.
I think that's helpful. I mean, this is sort of the same way that like spell check hasn't put editors out of business.
Right.
So
that's a great
That was the first, when we announced something, and that was one of the first Slack messages I got from one of my compatriots was, should I be looking for a job? we need to get a handle on this. And so we did a podcast with Greg Bennett. We did this. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I really see this as a way of, I certainly see things that we do that could definitely be automated or that machines could most definitely do better. I'm sure a machine can create a C also link way better than I can from scratch. But are there things that I do better than machines? Well, yeah, absolutely. Like write original content. I'm much better than a machine doing that, at least for right now. So,
I mean, I'm coming out of this realizing that what you all do and what the editors do is like even more important for a lot of the reasons that you've outlined here, right? Making those executive decisions, organizing doing organizing complex sets of topics and things like that. So anyhow, this has been fantastic. So thanks again. And thank you, Stephanie, for really appreciate your jumping in.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Kate is awesome. Take care. Have a good rest of the day.
All right, bye.
Bye-bye.